in especially American femininity. Like you can still be considered feminine and be a tomboy and play sports with the boys and so on. That is not necessarily a huge strike against your femininity. And in a way that like a boy who expresses himself more effeminately, he's like kicked out of the boy club. He's kicked out of the man club. He is seen as homosexual and or effeminate and therefore less of a man. But there isn't really that same kind of policing of expressions of femininity.
Well, I think that for the tomboy archetype, though, while they are accepted in their childhood, the second that they go through puberty, they're expected to start embodying the feminine.
True,
so when we see them in film, the tomboy in film, there's always a turning point toward the end, even in like TV shows and stuff where they're friends with like their tomboy neighbor, best friend, whatever, the whole time. And then they decide to like go to a dance together, and then she overreacts and is like, we're in love now, and then shows up to the dance like in full makeup and in a gown and whatever, and then the kid freaks out and is like, oh my god, that's not my friend anymore, you know.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And if you continue with the tomboyness after puberty, then you're more or less written off as a lesbian. Lesbians are so invisibilized culturally speaking. Like unless they are performing their sexuality for the benefit of men, there's just so little representation of lesbians in our culture.
Totally.
And again though, like it comes back to the idea that like if you were assigned male at birth, if you are a person who was assigned male at birth, and as you're growing up you exhibit more stereotypically feminine characteristics, you are more likely to be cast out of the man club. Like you are not welcome here. You are no longer masculine. We want nothing to do with you. Whereas I feel like there isn't that same kind of policing of what is feminine from inside femininity. Like there isn't as strict a control over what is feminine and what is not. And I have a theory about it, which is that it's because femininity is less of its own thing and more of like the mirror of what masculinity is not.
Right. Like even historically in Europe, men were characterized as reasonable and rational, while women acted based around their emotions and intuition.
Women.
But you can define reasonable and rational. Like you can scientific, like everything in science is defined with reason and ration.
Yeah.
But when you try and define something in science based on emotion and intuition, you can't really do it. And I feel like the concept is the same when it comes to like just physically who we are.
Right. Like men are big, therefore women are small. Men are active, therefore women are passive. It's almost like any attribute that gets attributed to the male gender, feminine people just get whatever is the opposite of that. So
by default, we're defined as the opposite of whatever male characteristic is being presented at that moment.
Even more so the lack of it. So it's like more of like a void than an actual category unto itself.
Which again, like makes the definition of femininity is entirely based on the definition of what is masculine.
Exactly. And it also makes it more slippery. So like, if like Dolly Parton was trying to do femininity and my mom was like, oh, well, I don't like her because she's too feminine. It's like, well, what? There's like, there's no comfortably feminine place that you can just be in where somebody isn't going to be telling you that you're doing it wrong.
Morticia Addams pulls it off.
Oh, I love Morticia Addams. Yes, please, let's talk about Morticia Addams.
Morticia Addams is feminine, but she's kind of just doing whatever she feels like doing at any given time. She's beautiful. She does have cleavage. She's
Oh, boy,
willowy. She's like
she is
defined.
willowy. You're
she
right.
is.
She's got the willowy thing going on.
And this is a quote from her from one of the Addams Family movies. I'm just like any modern woman trying to have it all. Loving husband, a family. I just wish I had more time to seek out the dark forces and join their hellish crusade.
I feel the same way.
But when it comes down to it, is Morticia is like a feminist queen, and she does have it all. She's not only able to do whatever she feels like doing, whether it's rational or emotional, but she can define like her own style, while at the same time having children and a husband who adore her for being who she is.
And she is outwardly sexually voracious.
Yeah.
Like she pursues Gomez for sex actively. And that is something that, oh boy, I could definitely do an entire episode of me just talking about my feelings about female sexual passivity as the norm. And I think that one reason that I love Morticia Addams so much is that she is clearly not that way. And yet she is ultra feminine. And there's something really powerful about that.
I mean, I think this character is doing the same thing that the real life person, Dolly Parton, is doing, except from the other direction. She's coming from, she's already like, should be ostracized from society, but she's put into like this, like suburban kind of world. And she is already considered a witch or whatever.
Right.
But then she comes in from that direction and then kills it. It's like she just like rocks it.
She slaughters it. But I have to point out here, we're calling Dolly and Morticia sort of our like ultra feminine have it all people. However, Morticia does not have a career. Dolly does not have children.
True.
So I see absolutely nothing wrong with either of those things, because I think people should be entitled to do whatever they want. But I do think that when we are talking about the like women can have it all, we tend to mean the career and the kids.
Right.
Which is that's the eternal question of like whether you can really do it both ways. And that's probably something that we could discuss much more in like a motherhood oriented episode. But I mean, obviously femininity and motherhood are so completely intertwined that it would be silly not to mention it here.
That's what's dangerous about women, is that we control creation. And not only that, but recently we found that we don't even need men to control creation. We can make babies with our own bone marrow, and those babies will only be female.
Look out, world.
Yeah. But happening. I should also mention that I have a career and 6 children and a house. And
you know, that's a good point.
So I prove that, you know, this is a real thing.
You do have it.
I have it all.
And you know what all 3 of you have? Supportive, significant others. And
absolutely.
I think that is what is often missing from the conversation about how somebody can have it all. Because if we have a masculine identifying person who is very successful, we more or less assume that that person is probably married and probably has children and has the support of the spouse, you know, on their side. But that is very different when we're talking about a feminine identified individual. Like anytime that a woman with kids is interviewed in the media, it's like 9 times out of 10 at least, they're going to be asked about like, well, why aren't you home with your kids?
Oh, I get asked that just at comedy shows where I'm performing.
Wow.
Like, where are your children?
Yeah, like, because obviously your spouse or significant other or other support network people couldn't be watching your kids for you, because as a mother and as a woman, that is your role.
Yeah. Or
And
somebody asked me once if my house was a wreck because I was always like back when I was doing more comedy, I was on the road all the time. And I was like, well, my husband does laundry and the dishes and cooks all the meals. And so it's not really like there's any chore being neglected.
mm-hmm.
It's just that, I'm not doing the traditional roles. And so therefore it's assumed that they're not getting done at all.
Right. I don't understand how people don't think that that mindset is insulting to your husband and your children. Like, what are they just
Right.
incapable of doing things? Like, what?
Yeah.
They just sit around and twiddle their thumbs when you're not around. Like, oh gosh,
Yeah.
what are we gonna do? And it's interesting too. I was thinking about this as I was reading today, like how a lot of what feminism is fighting against for a long time is the infantilization of women,
Mm-hmm.
like seeing us as so passive and so accommodating and so on and so forth. But the role that has been ascribed to women in like the family unit, which is to do everything for everyone, is the exact opposite of infantilization. Because
Yeah.
I I hate to say this, most dudes don't know how to do laundry. Most dudes can't fend for themselves in a house. Like, that's why we have the whole trope of like bachelors living in complete squalor. Like,
Yeah.
they are not encouraged to take care of their surroundings and their health and clean things on their own. So,
That's
like,
because they're encouraged to find somebody to do that for them.
right. And so it's bizarre to me how women are infantilized and seen as helpless. And that's a huge part of what femininity is, because masculinity is supposed to be the opposite. But when it comes to like basic tasks, dudes are not doing so hot. They're kind of infants in that
Yeah.
way.
Well, I talked about this in the last episode where statistically men's amount of work goes down and women's amount of work actually goes up significantly when men and women move in with each other.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Who's the
that
infant
sucks.
now?
Yeah.
It really
And
it
it's
is bizarre.
like we've been raised to be caregivers, and then our own experience as like having to be caregivers is used against us
Mm-hmm.
to keep us in the household.
Yes, abso-freaking-lutely. And that might go back to our conversation about like the nuclear family a lot also. As we had discussed, like in most pre-colonized societies that I am aware of, there's very much like a group feeling where, everybody's helping look after everybody else's kids. So if somebody has to go do something, you don't have to worry about it, right? There's not like one
Mm-hmm.
person in this group that is responsible for caretaking everybody. There's a whole lot of people who are responsible
Right.
for caretaking everybody. And like stripped of that in a much more nuclear family setting, the feminine adult in the situation is supposed to somehow become this superwoman and take care of everything for everyone. And that is literally what is expected of feminine people. And it's like not possible. and
Right.
and it is stressing us out. Like, I have been getting little bits and pieces. I haven't done a whole deep dive into this, but I am starting to get the impression that women in America do not sleep. Most of the people I know who are affected by insomnia, myself included, are women. And like we are so stressed out. We are so stressed out. There is so much placed on our shoulders, and I'm sure that that is true for people who identify as male. Also,
And for my husband, I sleep like a damn baby every single night. But my husband stays up and goes and gets some of the laundry done and checks on all the kids to make sure they're all sleeping and make sure they're, and so, um, I mean, it's exactly what you're saying is like, this is too much for one person to handle. And so by dividing these roles up, like these household roles specifically to this conversation right now, um, unequally, then you're kind of expecting like too much out of the other person in the relationship.
Right. Yeah. You're expecting the person to take care of you and